honestly, like, my life ended. Yeah.
The pain palpable from thousands of miles away. Paula Sakea speaking with us exclusively tonight from Trinidad about her daughter, 33-year-old Salisha Ali. More of her body parts turned up in Queens last week.
I don't even know how to feel. I don't have no feelings anymore. I can't feel happy. I can't feel. I don't know. I just like all my feelings just lock off.
Miss Sakea has been at a loss for months now, but she certainly felt something about her daughter's relationship with a 75-year-old man she first met while he was visiting Trinidad in 2022.
How did that make you feel when you heard that they had gotten married?
I told her, I said that he could be your grandfather. You know, and she said it's not a marriage like that. He's just trying to help me and the kids.
The mother of three eventually moved to the United States to live with Rupshan Simbu in Queens on the promise of a better life. It wouldn't take long for there to be trouble in paradise.
He was like more controlling, trying to control her not to go, don't go here, don't go there. He tell her don't go and work. You could stay home. And she was telling me, she said, I did not come up here to be our housewife.
Miss Sakea stopped hearing from her daughter last July. It wasn't until September that her beheaded torso was found by sanitation workers.
It was just after sunrise in Queens. The kind of morning that doesn't ask for attention. Streets waking up slowly, trucks moving block to block, sanitation workers doing what they always do, lifting bags, clearing curbs, moving on. Nothing about that morning was supposed to be different. Until one of them stopped. At first, it was just a smell. The kind that doesn't belong on a quiet street. The kind that makes you pause, then look closer. There was a garbage bag sitting off to the side of the road. Nothing unusual about that. But something about it wasn't right. They approached it, opened it, and everything changed. Inside was a human torso. No head, no arms, no legs. Just a body cut apart, wrapped, and discarded like it didn't belong to anyone. Like no one would come looking for it. In that moment, the routine of the morning was over. Police were called. The area locked down. And a quiet street in Queens became the center of something far darker. But thousands of miles away, in Trinidad, a mother was still waiting. Waiting for her daughter to call. Waiting for a message. Waiting for anything that would explain the silence that had stretched from days, into weeks, into months. Her daughter, Salisha Ali, had left that life behind. Left her home, her children, even the man she had been with in Trinidad, to start over in the United States. She had married a man nearly 4 decades older than her, 75 years old, believing it would open the door to something better. A future. Stability. Opportunity. But what she walked into was not what she thought it would be. And by the time the truth began to surface, it was already too late. Somewhere, her mother back in Trinidad was still waiting for a phone call that would never come. If you're into real true crime stories that dig deep into the facts and the people behind them, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We post new videos every single day, so there's always another case to cover, another truth to explore. Salisha Ali's life began in Brazil Village, Trinidad, in a place where people knew each other, where family wasn't something distant, and where her identity was rooted in more than just a name on a report. She was a mother first. 3 daughters depending on her. 3 lives tied directly to the choices she made every day. And like many women in her position, her life revolved around responsibility, providing, showing up, figuring things out, even when the options in front of her were limited. By all accounts, Salisha carried her weight. She wasn't someone drifting through life. She was present, active, engaged in the world around her. And that version of her life, the one that existed before everything changed, was visible to anyone who cared to look. Because she shared it. On her Facebook page, pieces of her everyday life were laid out in real time. Photos, moments, glimpses into what her world looked like at that time. And up to 2023, one thing was clear. She wasn't alone. She was in a relationship. Pictures of her and the man she was with showed something that looked familiar. Comfortable. Normal. The kind of life that didn't raise questions. Kind of life that didn't suggest she was trying to escape anything. There was structure. Routine. A sense that she already had something established where she was. And that matters. Because when people later tried to understand how she ended up in Queens, married to a man nearly 4 decades older than her, it would be easy to assume she had nothing tying her down. But that wasn't true. She had a life. She had connections. She had something that from the outside looked stable enough to stay. The turning point didn't come from what was already there. It came from what was introduced. Somewhere between 2022 and 2023, a man named Rupshan Simbu entered her life. He came from the United States, and he arrived in Trinidad during a visit. He was 75 years old. Salisha was 34. A 41-year age gap that didn't go unnoticed. It couldn't. And It didn't sit quietly with the people closest to her. Her mother saw it immediately. To her, it didn't make sense. She questioned it. She pushed back. She said what many people in that position would say. How could this work? But Salisha had already made up her mind about how she saw it.
I told her, I said that he could be your grandfather. And she said it's not a marriage like that. He's just trying to help me and the kids.
That statement reframes everything. It shifts the focus away from emotion and places it directly on purpose. Because what Simbu represented to her wasn't just a partner. He was an opportunity, a way out of limitation, a chance to step into something that felt bigger than what she currently had access to. He was offering a pathway, one that came with structure, a move to the United States, a home in Queens, immigration sponsorship. For a woman raising 3 children, that kind of offer carries weight. It's not abstract, it's practical, it's immediate, it's the kind of decision that doesn't just affect you, it affects everyone depending on you. So the relationship developed, not in the way people usually describe love stories, but in a way that made sense within the context of what she was trying to build. And eventually, it led to a decision. In 2024, Salisha left Trinidad. She stepped away from the life she had been living, the environment she knew, the people she was used to, any lingering romantic relationship, the routine that had defined her daily existence, and she moved to South Ozone Park, Queens. It wasn't a small shift, it was a complete reset. New country, new home, new marriage, everything changed at once. She married Simbu, and from the outside, nothing immediately appeared wrong. Neighbors would later describe what they saw as ordinary. The two of them sitting on the porch during the summer, music playing, drinks in hand, a couple existing in a shared space, moving through their days like anyone else. There were no obvious signs, no visible conflict, nothing that would make someone watching from across the street stop and think something was off. It looked like 2 people settling into a life together. But within months of her arrival, things began to shift, not in ways that could be easily documented or pointed to in a single moment, but in patterns, restrictions, subtle changes in what was allowed and what wasn't, where she could go, who she could see. The boundaries around her began to tighten, and then came one of the most significant shifts of all. Work. He told her not to. Told her to stay home, to be a housewife. For someone who had crossed an ocean believing she was stepping into opportunity, someone who left her children back home, that kind of restriction changes everything. Because independence isn't just about movement, it's about access. Access to money, access to people, access to choices. And when those things are removed, what's left is dependence. Salisha understood that almost immediately. She said it clearly. I did not come up here to be a housewife. But recognition doesn't always equal escape, especially not in a situation where everything that once supported you is now thousands of miles away. No family nearby, no established network, no financial independence, just one person, the same person controlling the structure of your day-to-day life. And that's how the environment begins to change. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Restriction by restriction, until the space around you feels smaller than it did before you ever left home. And while from the outside, the house in South Ozone Park still looked the same, inside, her world was beginning to close in. At first, the distance between Salisha and her family didn't feel unusual. She had moved countries. That alone changes the rhythm of communication. Time zones shift. Daily routines become unfamiliar. Calls become scheduled instead of spontaneous. Messages don't always come when you expect them. But there was still contact. She was still reaching out, still talking to her mother back in Trinidad, still letting her know what was happening on the other side of that decision she had made. And in those conversations, the reality of her situation began to surface more clearly. What had started as subtle restriction inside the home began to show itself in her voice, in the way she spoke, in the frustration that she could no longer hide. She talked about the control, about being told where she could go and where she couldn't, about being told who she could see and who she should avoid, about not being allowed to work, being expected to stay inside, to exist within a space that was no longer hers to navigate freely. Those weren't just complaints, they were signals, the kind that don't always register fully in the moment, especially when they're coming through a phone call from thousands of miles away. Her mother heard it. She heard the frustration. She heard the change. She heard the difference between the daughter she knew in Trinidad and the daughter now describing a life that felt restricted. But hearing something and being able to act on it are 2 different things, because there was nothing she could physically do. She wasn't in the same country. She couldn't walk into that house. She couldn't stand between her daughter and the situation she was describing. All she could do was listen, and hope that somehow Salisha would find a way to shift things, or leave, or regain some kind of control over her own life. But the distance between them wasn't just physical anymore. It was becoming something else. Because the more isolated Salisha became in Queens, the more limited her ability to change anything became. No job, no income, no immediate support system, just a voice on the phone, reaching across an ocean, trying to explain something that couldn't be fixed from the other side of it. And then, the call started to slow down. Not all at once, not in a way that immediately raised alarms, just less frequent. More gaps between conversations, more moments where the phone didn't ring, more time passing without updates, until everything narrowed down to one final point of contact. July 13th, a FaceTime call. The last time anyone could say with certainty that Salisha Ali was alive. There was nothing in that call that suggested it would be the last. No dramatic goodbye. No indication of what was about to happen. Just a conversation. The kind people have every day without realizing it might be the final one. And then, silence. That same day, while her family still believed she was somewhere living her life, Rupchand Simbu walked into a police precinct in Queens and reported his wife missing. On the exact same day she was last seen alive. No search, no urgency that anyone could point to. No visible effort to locate her before involving law enforcement. Just a report. Filed calmly. Placed into the system before anyone else even knew there was something to question. At that point, there was no body, no confirmed crime, just a missing person report and a story that hadn't yet been challenged. And for a while, that was enough. Because when her family reached out, when they called, when they tried to understand why she wasn't responding, the answers they received came from him. He told them she had moved out, said she was cutting everyone off, said she didn't want to be in contact anymore. And in the absence of anything to contradict that, they believed him. Because why wouldn't they? He was her husband, the person she had chosen, the person she had trusted enough to build a life with in a different country. There was no immediate reason to assume he was lying, so they waited. They kept calling. They kept hoping that eventually Salisha would reach out herself and clear everything up. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. July became August. August became September. And through all of it, the story remained the same. She left. She doesn't want to talk. She's choosing distance. And while that explanation settled in on one side of the ocean, on the other side, in Queens, life appeared to continue as normal. Neighbors still saw him, still moving through his routine, still present, still existing in the same space where Salisha had once been seen with him. There was no visible disruption, no sign, from the outside, that anything significant had happened inside that home. And that's what made it easier for the story to hold. Because nothing about his behavior forced anyone to question it right away. But underneath that surface, something else had already taken place. Something that would not stay hidden forever. On September 22nd, early in the morning, sanitation workers were doing their routine rounds near Idlewild Park in Queens. A quiet stretch of road. Nothing about that location suggested it would become the center of an investigation, until the smell hit. Strong enough to stop them. There was a garbage bag sitting along the roadside. At first it was just another piece of trash, but when they approached it, when they opened it, a human torso. No head, no arms, no legs. Just a body, cut apart and left behind. There were no identifying documents. No immediate way to confirm who it belonged to. Just a crime scene. Police were called. The area was secured, and investigators were left with a question that needed to be answered quickly. Who was she? Without a face? Without hands? Without anything that could immediately confirm identity, they had to rely on what remained. And what remained were tattoos. Distinct enough to be traced. Recognizable enough to connect to a missing person report filed months ago. And eventually, that process led them to a name. Salisha Ali. The same woman who had been reported missing months earlier. The same woman whose family had been told she chose to walk away from them. The same woman her mother had been waiting to hear from. By the time that identification was made, the reality had already begun to settle in. The person they had been hoping would call had already been found, but not completely, because the torso was only part of what had been done. In the days and weeks that followed, investigators began locating additional remains in different areas across Queens. Her head, her arms, her legs, recovered separately, placed in different locations, as if distance could somehow erase connection.
Now to an update on a gruesome discovery in Queens. The human remains found last week in the Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge. Police say a human head appears to belong to a Guyanese woman. Her torso was also found last September by two sanitation workers near Idlewood Park. The torso did not have any injuries on it. Her cause of death remains unknown.
The condition of the remains made that clear. Forensic analysis showed that tools had been used. Knives, saws. This required time, deliberation. A series of actions, carried out step by step, which meant that whoever was responsible didn't just react, they planned. And once that reality became clear, the investigation narrowed. There were no eyewitnesses, no one who had seen the act itself. So detectives built the case the way they often do in situations like this, through evidence. Naturally, they will start with her husband, the one who had reported her missing. They started with his data, cell phone records, location history, and what they found created a pattern that was difficult to ignore. Rupchand Simbu's phone had been in the exact areas where the remains were recovered. Not nearby, not passing through, at those locations. The same spots where the torso had been found. The same areas where additional remains had been recovered. His phone was there. And that was just one piece. When investigators searched the home the two of them had shared, they found something else. Materials, plastic wrap, rope, matching what had been used on the body. Still inside the house, still present, still tying everything back to the same place. At that point, the story he had been telling no longer held. Because now, there was a timeline. A missing person report filed on the same day she was last seen alive. Months of explanations given to her family, and physical evidence connecting him to the locations where her body had been discarded. Everything pointed in one direction. And eventually, that direction led straight back to the house in South Ozone Park. That's where he was arrested, taken into custody, charged with murder, tampering with evidence, and obstruction. Each charge representing a different part of what had taken place, what was done, how it was hidden, and how the narrative was manipulated afterward.
For months, neighbors have been haunted by what happened to the young woman who lived in this house with her husband.
Anything that you noticed that was sort of alarming about their relationship?
No, not really. They would sit outside on the porch in the summertime. Sometimes we see them having a beer and like just hanging out to play music, but otherwise than that, it seems normal to me.
What happened to 34-year-old Salisha Ali is anything but normal. Her head was discovered in the Jamaica Wildlife Refuge in Broad Channel last Thursday. The rest of her body stuffed in a garbage bag, found by sanitation workers in another part of Queens back in September. Hasina had no idea she was living across the street from a killer, but she started to wonder.
When we gather a little bit of information of what happened, we were like, okay, this guy is scary. But then for a while, everything went silence, and we saw him living his life as normal, so we just thought that maybe he wasn't found guilty.
75-year-old Rupchand Simbu went on living his life as usual until today, when he was arrested and charged with the murder of his wife. Ali met him in Trinidad in 2023. She moved to Queens with him a year later to get married. Police sources say the 75-year-old was the 34-year-old's immigration sponsor. He was the one who reported her missing in July. Detectives now believe to throw them off.
As me knowing him, he's a quiet man. Quiet man.
Relatives of the husband now charged with murder showed up to the house tonight. They did not want to offer a comment, but one of them did say they have just as many questions as we do. Hasina feels somewhat relieved tonight.
Well, yes, that he's not just, I have a young daughter and, trying to raise a family here, and you don't want to live across from someone as dangerous as him.
Exactly how Miss Ali was killed is still under investigation.
But while the case moved forward, while the investigation came together, there was still one moment that hadn't happened yet. The moment the truth reached Trinidad, October 23rd. That's when the call came. Not from her daughter, from investigators, asking her mother to help identify tattoos. And in that moment, everything she had been holding on to, everything she had believed for months, collapsed. Because the story she had been told, that her daughter had left, that she had chosen distance, that she was alive somewhere, was no longer possible. It's just like my life ended. That's how she described it. And it wasn't just the loss itself. It was the realization that she had spent months waiting, hoping, believing something that was never true. She didn't just lose her daughter that day. She lost her all over again when she realized she had already been gone.
In the interim, Ali's husband told the family she moved out and was cutting everyone off.
I was believing everything he was saying. Yeah. Until the detectives called me on October the 23rd and told me if I could identify some tattoos.
Ali's decomposed head, legs, and an arm were discovered in the Jamaica Wildlife Refuge last week. Investigators would find the same plastic wrap and rope used to bind the victim's torso in her husband's home. Using cell phone data, detectives also found Simbu had been to the locations where Ali's remains turned up. The 75-year-old was charged this week with killing and dismembering his wife.
I was so relieved that he was finally gonna pay for what he did.
And when you step back from everything that happened, from the move, the marriage, the control, the silence, the discovery, one thing becomes clear. Salisha Ali didn't make a reckless decision. She made a hopeful one. She chose what she believed was a better path. a way to build something more for herself and for her children. But the structure of that decision placed her in a position where leaving wasn't simple. No job, no independent income, no immediate support, just distance and control, and a reality that became harder to change with each passing day. She said it herself. I did not come up here to be a housewife. She knew something was wrong, but by the time the world understood just how wrong it had become, she was already gone. And in Trinidad, 3 children were left without their mother. A mother was left without her daughter.